The storm had come suddenly, as if the heavens themselves had split open. Rain hammered down in wild sheets, the river rose with a fury that shook the land, and branches snapped like brittle bones in the rushing current. Along that swollen riverbank, beneath a sky split with lightning, a single cry broke through the chaos. It was faint, almost lost in the roar of the waters, but it was unmistakable. The thin, piercing wail of a child. Clara Whitmore stopped in her tracks. She was a woman hardened by loss, a widow who had weathered droughts, sickness, and loneliness in her years on the frontier. Yet the sound of a baby's cry cut through all the noise of storm and fear. Guided by instinct, she moved toward the reeds at the edge of the river. There, half submerged and tangled in brush, was a wicker basket. With trembling arms, Clara dragged it free. Inside, drenched and shivering, was a baby boy, his tiny fists clenched against the cold. Relief flooded her heart as she saw he was alive, though weak. She pressed him close, whispering words the storm swallowed whole. And then she noticed a mark on the child's wrist. Dark, distinct, shaped like a coiled serpent. Not a wound, not dirt, but a birthmark, etched as if by fate itself. Clara's breath caught. She had seen that mark before. It was the sign of Silas McGraw, the most feared outlaw of the Western Territories. For years his name had haunted wanted posters, his crimes whispered of in taverns and courtrooms alike: robbery, bloodshed, betrayal. It was said he branded those loyal to him with the snake mark, and rumors swirled that his own kin were born bearing it. Clara stared at the baby and felt the weight of destiny pressing down on her. By dawn, word had spread through the small settlement of Dry Creek. Men gathered in the saloon, women gossiped in hushed voices, and everywhere the same question was asked: what kind of child had the river carried into their midst? Some said the boy was cursed, that he would grow to be a mirror of his father. Others argued he should be turned over to the law, or worse, left to the elements. But Clara, standing firm in the face of their stares, declared him hers. She named him Eli and carried him home of the years past, each season adding weight to the boy's story. Eli grew strong beneath Clara's roof, working the soil, feeding stock, and kneeling at her side during Sunday prayers. Yet despite his honesty and effort, the whispers never ceased. The mark on his wrist was a brand he could not remove, a silent accuser always in plain sight. When chickens vanished from a coop, when fences were cut in the night, when tempers flared without cause, suspicion fell upon him. The children of Dry Creek learned their parents' fear and repeated their cruel words in the schoolyard. Clara's love shielded him as best it could. She reminded him daily that a man is made not by the blood in his veins but by the choices in his heart. Still, Eli carried the burden of doubt. Walking the streets of Dry Creek under eyes that measured and mistrusted. He tried to prove himself, but the harder he worked, the louder the whispers became. One summer, when Eli had grown into his teenage years, a ragged drifter rode into town. His face was weathered by sun and sin, his eyes sharp with memory. He watched Eli from the corner of the saloon, and when the boy lifted a bucket at the well, the drifter laughed low. He had seen that mark before. He told the townsfolk that he had once ridden with Silas McGraw, and there was no mistaking it. The boy was the outlaw's blood. The town's unease hardened into fear. Men muttered about driving the boy out before he became a threat. Some spoke of shackles, others of bullets. Clara stood alone against the tide, her voice fierce but trembling. Yet her protests only deepened the divide. The more she defended him, the more convinced the town became that she was blinded by foolish love. And then, as though summoned by the growing whispers, Silas McGraw himself returned. Long thought dead, he emerged from the shadows like a ghost made flesh. His hair was streaked with gray, his body scarred from years of violence, but his presence was as dark and commanding as the legends claimed. He had come not for vengeance, not for plunder, but for blood. He had come for his son. For Clara, the moment was a reckoning. The man whose sins had marked Eli from birth stood at her door, demanding the child as his heir. He promised safety if she surrendered him, hinted at ruin if she resisted. Yet Clara, weary from years of struggle but unyielding, refused. The boy she had pulled from the river belonged to her, not to the outlaw who had abandoned him. The truth could no longer be shielded. Clara sat Eli down and told him everything: the night by the river, the mark on his wrist, the legacy that shadowed him. Her voice carried sorrow, but also hope. She needed him to understand that destiny was not chains but choices, that a man could rise above even the darkest inheritance. When Silas faced his son, the tension was like a storm before lightning. He told Eli that blood was unshakable, that no prayer or mother's love could wash away what flowed in his veins. The boy was meant to follow him, meant to wear the crown of crime and fear. The town gathered, silent, as though watching judgment itself unfold. Eli's heart pounded with the weight of decision. On one side was the man whose blood he carried, whose mark he bore. On the other was the woman who had pulled him from death, who had given him her name, her love, and her life. And when the choice came, Eli stood not with blood, but with love. The night erupted in violence. Guns roared across the dusty street as lawmen of Dry Creek clashed with Silas McGraw and his few remaining riders. Clara held Eli close, shielding him as bullets tore through the air. The fight was brutal, the ground thick with smoke and gunpowder. When it ended, Silas lay fallen, his chest torn by lead, his breath shallow. In his final moments, he looked upon the boy he had tried to claim. Perhaps for the first time, he saw strength greater than his own, a strength born not of violence but of defiance. And then he was gone, silence followed. The town, once filled with fear, now looked upon Eli with something different. They saw that he had rejected his father's shadow, had chosen light over darkness. The mark on his wrist remained, but its meaning had changed. It was no longer a brand of fear but a reminder of what he had overcome. Clara, aged and tired yet unbroken, took his hand. Together they walked through the streets of Dry Creek, past eyes that now held respect rather than suspicion. The boy she had rescued from the river carried not the curse of a wanted man's mark, but the legacy of a mother's courage. His story, once whispered with fear, became one of redemption, proof that the river could carry not only death and ruin, but also the chance to begin anew.